The best thing about Christmas is the food, but the second best thing is the decorations. For the last several years, I've been making these bead netting covered bauble thingies, and I'm going to show you how to do it. Now, a couple of things out the way. If you're thinking I could make those and sell them down the Christmas markets, I mean, technically you could, but you aren't going to make a living, sorry. There's just too much time sunk into one of these, as I will show you with my time-lapse video. So yeah, the other thing is, if you are a person who finds fiddly, tiny scale, repetitive, dexterous tasks tedious and frustrating rather than meditative and relaxing, this is probably not going to be the hobby for you. If that alarms you, but you are still bead curious and would like to try this, maybe just try a smaller one than my beefy boy here. Still with me? Great. What you need is a glass bauble of pretty much any shape, size, or color. You can use the plastic ones with the seam up the side, but they're just not very classy, and this much work really deserves a classy bauble. You're going to need some beads, seed beads, pony beads, bugle beads, bicone crystals, faceted round crystals, pearls, drops, whatever you've got. The only really crucial ones is the seed beads. Everything else is negotiable. You're going to need some thread, specifically bead thread, which distinguishes itself from normal sewing thread by being very thin and strong, and by being a floss, not a twist. And not being twisted is super helpful for not tangling as you pull 5 meters of thread through your work over and over again. And you will need a beading needle. These are thinner than normal needles, and depending on your beads, you're not going to get a normal needle through even once, let alone multiple times. Okay, thread that needle with upwards of 5 meters of thread. Yep, 5 meters. I mean, you can use less if you want. You're going to have to tie off and rethread 3 times, even if you do use 5 meters. And if you use less, you'll have to tie off and rethread more. I find the trade-off better in the direction of more thread the first time and less tying off, but you do you and see how you get on. You can put a stop bead at the end, or you can just do what I do and leave 20 centimeters hanging out and cut it off at the end. So the first thing you need is a ring of beads to go around the neck of the bauble. I use seed beads, and I put them on in groups of 3, in this case pearl, pearl, gold. I do that because it's easier to count and because 3 makes a nice close setting for the netting stitch. So put on enough beads to get around the neck of your bauble, and then round up to a whole number of 3 bead repeats, and then count your beads. I've got 48 here in 16 groups of 3, so that means that I'm going to have 16 loops in my netting stitch on each row. And 16 is going to divide nicely into 4, so I'll have 4 sets of swags around my bauble. If you start with a different number of groups of 3, that's completely cool. You're just going to have to figure out what that divides into for swagging purposes later on. There's really no such thing as wrong here. They're just interesting variations. Bring the thread through the beads until just the 20 centimeters is sticking out the end, and put the needle through the beads again in the same direction as the first pass. Pull the whole lot into a circle and go through the first few beads again because it makes it easier to pull the circle closed. Go through all the beads again for a total of 3 and a bit passes through the ring in order to ensure it's snug and won't open out when you're working with it. If it's opening out when you tug on it, just go around one more time. Hopefully you can just pop that ring onto the neck of your bauble. If it's a tiny bit tight, you'll probably get away with it if you pull the cap off the bauble, which most baubles do quite happily. And if it's a tiny bit loose, it will probably fall off several times while you're working with it, but aside from that, it won't be a disaster. Okay, first step of most of my baubles these days is to cover the top half with a fairly close netting stitch. This is long and tedious and not for people who get bored easily stringing beads. Did I mention that already? In this case, I came out of a gold one, put on 2 pearls, a gold, and 2 pearls, and then went through the next gold one on the circle, forming a little loop. Repeat that all the way around and finish with the thread coming out through the bead at the tip of the first loop. Then you're just going to do that again from there all the way around, using the gold bead at the tip of each of your previous loops as the anchor bead. And then just go around again and again and again. You're going to need to add some beads into each successive row, and this wants a bit of judgment as to how many beads you add. There's a certain minimum because you're increasing the diameter of the circle, but also the more you add, the taller your diamonds are going to be on your netting, so that's an aesthetic choice to make. Also, as the loops get longer, I tend to add sort of blingier beads at this point. Just play with whatever you've got. Tension is pretty important in netting stitch. If you are too loose, you're going to see bits of thread sticking through your beads, but if you're too tight, your beads will cram up like crooked teeth and not lay straight and flat. I usually just pull the string through until the beads meet, but don't make any attempt to pull it actually tight, and that works reasonably well. I generally keep adding rows until I'm about halfway down the bauble. You can finish earlier, you can keep going until you get to the bottom of the bauble if you want, though you'll want to start removing some of the beads that you added in each row. The animation makes this look super tidy, but in real life at this stage, it's frilly and floppy and looks awful. Every time you put it down, it's rolling over and shedding its load onto the table. Don't be dispirited, that's normal. If you find a glass of the right diameter and drape a couple of tissues in it, you can use that as a bauble stand, and that will make your life much easier. Also, at some point right about now, you are going to find that you are running short of thread. Just leave yourself about 30-40 centimeters and weave in from wherever you are around about 5 or 6 sharp corners and then cut it. As long as you can pull on the last loop and it doesn't come out, you can feel confident that that's safe. And then to weave back in again, just do the opposite. Figure out where you want to come in, find your way 5 or 6 sharp corners away from that, and weave back in and come out where you left off. When you have done enough netting stitch, you want to put a dangly bit on the end of each of the loops on your last row of netting stitch. So add enough beads to just not quite reach the bottom of the bauble, go through a turning bead, then come up through all the beads on the dangly except the turning bead, and go through the origin bead in the same direction you went through it to come out. And work your needle through until you come out the bottom of the next netting loop. Keep your tension nice and loose on these, by the way, and repeat that all the way around. When you get back to the beginning, go down through the first dangly and out the bottom of the turning bead. You're going to gather all of these danglies up into a circle by adding as many beads as you need to draw them in and form a tightly closed circle at the bottom of the bauble. How many beads is that? Well, it depends on the bauble. In the animation, it's 5. In the real life bauble, it was 1. I've had baubles where it was none. You're just going to have to take your best shot and add them in. Pick up all the danglies as you go around, and when you come to close it, if you were grossly wrong, I'm so sorry, but just unthread your needle and pull it back and try again. When you get that circle to close into a snug circle that doesn't hang too far below the bottom of the bauble, just go around it 2 or 3 times so that it's snug and it doesn't pull open again. Just make sure that your needle is coming out one of the turning beads, ready to start the tassel. Or if you're doing this along with me and you have found that you've massively overestimated your patience for threading tons of beads, this is a perfectly adequate place to stop. No shame, just tie it off and consider it done. I, on the other hand, want this baby to look like it might have belonged to Queen Elizabeth I, so let's plow on. The tassel is a bit like a fringe hung from that circle that you just made, and not entirely unlike the danglies that we made in the last step. But I like to use a choke bead that draws all the strands together so it's more of a tassel and less of a fringe. Just use a larger bead a couple of centimeters down the first strand, which will be shared by all the subsequent strands. Aside from that, this is similar to the previous danglies with a turning bead at the end, back up and through the origin bead in the same direction you came out it. At the top in the circle, I'm going to skip every other turning bead so that I only have 8 strands in my tassel instead of 16, but you do as you please here. So the second strand of the tassel starts with these beads, goes through the choke bead, and then finishes like the previous one. Down through a turning bead and then all the way back up to the circle and through the origin bead in the same direction. And just repeat that all the way around. At the ends, I've used some mixed stuff. I've got some pearls, glass faceted beads. I've chosen it because it's bling and also because it's heavy, and that gives this a nice graceful fall. With the tassel done, that is another perfectly respectable place to tie off and finish if you're getting bored. I am not getting bored. I'm just getting to the good bit. Swags. As I've pointed out, my design has 16 spokes, so that divides into 4 quarters for my swagging purposes. If yours had a different number on the top, you're going to have to just figure out what yours divides into. And even if it was a prime number, there's lots of interesting things you can do. There's loads of scope for improv here. Look at your base netting, figure out roughly where you're going to add stuff, find the beads from which that stuff is going to emerge, and work your way up to one of them. Then anything kind of goes here. Just figure out how deep you want your swag to hang. That dictates how many beads you're going to add. I very often put a drop bead of some kind at the tip of them just to add a little bit of gothic to that arch. Just pile on the bling, have fun. Almost anything you do is going to look great. So here it is. 6 hours and 47 minutes. In case you were still entertaining notions of making these and selling them down the market, let's do the math. Basic living wage of £10 an hour plus about £5 or £10 for materials, you're looking at a £75 Christmas ornament. And that is why I don't sell the things I make. Look, I make crazy, opulent, beautiful, fiddly one-off things because I like making them and I like owning them. Part of the point is that you can't buy it. If exclusivity is your thing, this is as exclusive as it gets. Only someone who's willing to put in the time, or someone with the love of someone who's willing to put in the time, can have one of these. And if inclusivity is your thing, as it is mine, that's even better, because anyone with working hands and eyes that wants to learn how to do this can do it. And if you fancy one of these, I hope that that's you, and I hope that you'll send me pictures. Because 2 days after I finished making it, my partner smashed it while doing some vacuuming. Whereupon I learned that if you carefully cut the tassel off this model, you can tease open the bottom circle and just insert a new bauble and string it all up again and add another tassel, and it's fine. It's fine. No, honestly, it's fine. I'm over it.